Uber drivers, what is the most unforgettable conversation you've had to eavesdrop on?
Story 1. Not eavesdropping, but the most unforgettable conversation took me to meet Elon Musk, sort of. I was driving back space rocket scientists from a bar that the company bought out for a night in Cape Canaveral. They were there to watch the rocket launch in which the first stage booster would land back at the launch pad after detaching from the main payload capsule. This was their first attempt about 6 months after their first attempt, which failed in April 2015. While space has been successful with this process a handful of times since then, this particular launch marked the first time in history that a first stage booster landed successfully after launching a rocket into outer orbit. ULA did something similar, but this was in low Earth orbit, so science junkies don't count it. I watched the whole thing live, and indeed it was beautiful. And at the end, I figured I'd help taxi around some people. I was sure probably Ubered to the event in the first place. Hundreds were gathered. I usually chat with passengers to help pass the time and maybe learn something new. And I was surprised by the first space engineer I picked up who told me about the bar and how the workers had gathered to watch the launch. After I dropped them off the hotel they were staying at, I figured there'd be more rides and made my way back to their bar and indeed continued to shuttle several more scientists back to their hotel. After my third or fourth ride, one of the scientists said, "If you want to see Elon, he's at the bar too, hanging out." And in my head, I was like, oh my god. And so I dropped these guys off and drove back to the bar fast. I walked in right at 2 a.m. just as the bartender was starting to close up. I asked the bartender if I could get a drink before looking for Elon, but he appropriately said no. I said all right and turned around, and about 15 feet from the bar I saw Elon laughing with 4 or 5 of his presumably employees, and I stared, gawked really, for a brief moment. As much as I wanted to, I didn't walk up to him because I figured he wouldn't really care for my 21-year-old self at the time, and that's okay, since still the best night of Uber. I mean, first, I don't think Elon would have truly enjoyed being around a 21-year-old because you were far too old to find his sense of humor that appealing. I got you, Elon. I'm kidding, Elon. What a great success that was for your scientist specifically that night. But hey, you've enjoyed so many successes since then. I mean, look at your episode of SNL. Look what you're doing to Twitter, or should I say X? Ooh. Oh, man. Oh, it's been a great ride for Elon, the dipstick. I really wanted a chance to dunk on Elon for a little bit, so I'm glad this story was here to let me vent that out for a little while. Story 2! Okay, so this is a post I've been waiting on for a while. Buckle up, guys. This is a long one. Also, I'm mobile, so I don't have my formatting. Okay, I was driving for Uber a few years ago in Savannah, Georgia as a side hustle. And one night I picked up this couple from a bar. For simplicity, I will call them girl and boy, respectively. Both were drunk and were talking really loud. Boy kicked off the convo by talking about how he ended up in Savannah. And this is where I started to pay attention because he started to tell this girl that he had enlisted in the Marines to be an astronaut. He was going through his training and it was discovered that he had less than perfect eyesight. So he quit the MC and enrolled into med school in Tennessee to be an eye doctor because he wanted to help people like him to have better eyesight. Well, he couldn't stomach operating on humans, so he left med school and enrolled in veterinarian school. He then went on to say that he got bored of that and he left and moved to AV to go to art school, SCAD. While he was saying all of this, girl was all full of oohs and ahs. Then he tells her of his world travels, and that's when it happened. He mentioned a particular country that he had visited that girl had also visited, although at different times. A few years prior, there was a bomb set off in a mall there. Girl went on about how when she stayed there, she was at a hotel right next to the mall in question and how it could have been her at the mall. By the way, she was legit distraught over this, albeit a few years removed. And because the bombers were later identified as Muslim terrorists, boys went on to tell the craziest thing I have heard that night. He goes on to tell a story about how his cousins were in the same Eastern Bloc country, I can't remember right now, on a mission trip. The whole town comes under attack from, you guessed it, Muslim terrorists. He went on to say that he called his parents and told them what was going on with his cousins, and then proceeded to tell girl that his parents then called in a favor from a friend and had the effing CIA go in and rescue them. I then dropped them at a high-end apartment complex. I honestly felt bad for this girl. I feel like boy Sandra Bullock's grown-up child from Bird Box, apparently. I feel like Boy is full of crap from the way this story is being told. I can't quite pick it out. I'm not getting a clear picture of the tone here, but he does sound like a bit of a Napoleon Dynamite sort of type, you know what I'm saying? Maybe? Am I reading this right? Either way, I do feel bad for the girl because she seems pretty distraught, but, yeah.
Story 3. I just dropped off my last passenger for the night at MSP, Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. As I'm pulling away from the curb, I see a man around my age completely in tears. Especially in a high-traffic area, I'd normally keep on moving to avoid backing up traffic, but he's obviously in distress, and I didn't want to just walk away. I step out to ask him if he's all right, and he's mustering up everything he can to explain his situation through intermittent crying and attempts to breathe. He apparently needs to get to Duluth, Minnesota, 2.5 hours away, and no drivers, Uber, Lyft, shuttles, or taxis would accept his fare, especially since it was so late at night. Up to this point in my own life, I had been battling a deep depression, with most days leaving me feeling like I was on the losing end of an endless war, so I felt a great sense of empathy for this guy. All he needed was a little help. I showed him I was an Uber driver, I had the sticker on my car and the driver app, but motioned him to just hop in and that I'll give him a lift, off the books, no charge. He accepted, so we gathered his things, loaded up, and were on our way for a road trip to Duluth. We didn't talk, didn't need to. An hour in, once he collected himself and NPR started to static out, he asked to borrow my phone, so I obliged. Based on his conversation, he recently lost his wife of several years and their children in a car accident. He then lost his job. He lost his home, and now he was on his way to see his father, who was on his deathbed in Duluth, and had sold everything in his possession to make this trip. We pull up to the address, and while unloading his things, he attempted to hand me whatever money he has left, which I wasn't going to take regardless. But his gesture, which was a sandwich bag full of mixed coins and crumpled bills, let me know how grateful he was in spite of having lost everything. I was just happy to lift a burden off someone else's shoulders, even if only for 2.5 hours, and yet we really hadn't spoken up to this point. I went home, hugged my mom, who was asleep on the couch with the TV still on, and felt fortunate that I had an opportunity to lend a helping hand to someone who needed it.
Honestly, that is really awesome that you were able to do that out of the kindness of your heart, and I genuinely believe that that is something that is going to stick with that person. They're going to remember that act of kindness for the rest of their life, and you might have made a huge impact on his future. So that's awesome. And even if you didn't, I think you did not just the right thing, but something that was out of your way and really generous. So good for you. Also, awesome that this story's in Minnesota, because that's where I live, and Duluth is an awesome place, typically.
Story 4. I do Uber as a side gig here and there, mostly the late night shift, and I start my evenings in a bar district, usually the one near the private university. Some favorites, the 20-something girl that said nothing but pancakes, pronounced pancakes, again and again the entire ride. Her less drunk friend kept apologizing to her. The gal I dropped off at what I think was a rave. She kept telling me about how fun it was and that a bunch of the gals ended up topless last time. I did not want to see her topless. The couple that, as they were getting in the car, were trying to get another gal to come home with them. The guy kept talking about how he wanted that sweet bud. It was at the end of the night, so I obliged a Whataburger fast food stop. Car in front of us had a puking passenger. My passengers started yelling at them, and they almost got in a fight. The couple that's fallen in love for the night. I'm pretty sure they were doing the nasty in the back seat. I only asked them to not make a mess. They didn't. The gal, probably S-worker, I picked up from one cut-rate hotel, this was on my commute, I work in a crap part of town, and dropped off at another. She made a phone call that I only assume was to the next John. Kept saying baby and I can't wait to see you. Plenty of penis size and intercourse conversations, they mostly blur together. The group of early 20-somethings having a conversation about how one of them would have slept with a particular guy if he hadn't been so damn pushy. Dude, chill out. No one gets laid by demanding it. Story 5. Women always talk about D sizes to their girlfriends. From what I gather, anything below 5 inches is too small and over 8 is scary. So if you are between that 5 to 8 range, you're fine. Story 6. After an hour and a half drive from Pasadena to Santa Monica, an old woman, probably 85 plus years old, was talking to me about her children and grandchildren and asking me about my family. The entire ride flew by and I didn't even realize. My grandma had recently passed away at the time, so I really cherished talking to this woman. Gave me a hug goodbye and was just a wonderful person. Don't take your grandparents for granted. You will miss them when they are gone.
Folks, I lost my grandma probably about 7 years ago. And this person's absolutely right. Don't take them for granted because you do not know when you're going to lose them. In my mind, my grandma was always going to be there, and I wasn't as in touch with her the last couple years of her life as I should have been because I didn't think about the possibility of losing her. And now that she's gone, I have regrets for that just constantly. So if you got grandparents that you love, show them.
Story 7. A dude was on the phone to someone talking about the time he crapped himself with great detail. Another would have been the time I'm pretty sure 2 pool passengers hooked up. Lots of flirting, and she suggested he jump out at the same place she did. Story 8. Guy needed a ride from a restaurant to the motel he was staying in while his house was being rebuilt after a fire. The dude spent the whole 15-minute drive trying to convince me that he didn't burn down his house for the insurance money. Just started defending himself out of the blue as if I'd asked, "Hey buddy, did you burn down your house for the insurance money?" Weird. Story 9. I was actually the passenger and it was the driver talking in his earpiece. Driver looks to be in his 40s and he was apparently on the phone with a mistress behind his wife's back. Some juicy snippets I heard, not the exact phrases though. "My wife saw your message last night. I told her you're a colleague. Good thing you didn't send any hearts on that message. I'll tell my wife I'm busy tomorrow and she'll have to bring my son to the doctor herself. I booked our tickets to another country already. Let's go have fun. I told my wife I'm going for a fishing trip with my friends. I can't leave her so easily. We have a son already. Let me think of an excuse." Story 10. I'm 98% sure she was an S-worker. Picked her up from one hotel and was bringing her back to another. She was on the phone and I only caught it because her voice dropped suddenly and I automatically started paying attention. I normally just play Irish folk music and stay quiet, not listening. She said he was too big and she was going to need a diaper for a few days. I can only assume anal leakage after taking one bigger than she expected.
Oh, I don't like this. Oh, just too much information. Oh, there's so many stories. I've taken in so much information over the last year, but this was a straw that broke the mainly fact back. Oh, it's too much. I need a vacation.
Story 11. My apologies, this isn't an Uber driver story, but also an eavesdrop, so I'll play. When I was around 10, I was homesick from school one day and my dad was taking care of me. He left my door ajar to hear me in case I started vomiting. He thought I was asleep, but I could hear him talking to his best male friend at the time out in our family room. Dad's friend was telling him about how he cheated on his wife and how good it was, and he asked my dad if he ever cheated on my mom. Even at that age, I knew it was wrong and my heart raced as I listened for his answer. To this day, I'm in my early 20s. I am very proud of my dad for saying, "No, I had a chance to. Josh's, a mutual friend of my dad and his friend, wife put her hand between my legs, but I shoved her away. You know I love Christina," my mom's name. I never did tell anyone about that. My parents are still together. Story 12. For context, the local public transport system in my city is called TransLink. I picked up 2 dudes and one sat in the front, the other in the back, so it was kind of hard to not overhear their conversation. They were having a really intense conversation about the front seat guy's brother who had just come out to his family over Christmas as being transgender. The front seat guy was fine with it, but his parents were not, and it sounded like a pretty tense situation. His friend, the guy in the back seat, was sympathetic, saying, "Yeah man, that's heavy. I hope it all works out." You could tell there was a lot of emotional tension in the car. Then, after a few moments of silence, the friend piped up, "So does that mean she gets a discount with TransLink now?" The guy in the front seat burst out in laughter. Story 13. I once picked up 2 gals and a guy, presumably from dinner. They all sat in the back seat, which I thought was weird at first, but I decided they had been drinking and just didn't realize it. Fast forward to 5 minutes later, the two girls start kissing, and I was watching the whole thing go down in my rearview mirror. My first thought was, oh, it's a lesbian couple and their gay friend. Nope, he got in on the action, and I couldn't keep my eyes on the road because I was basically watching softcore porn go down in my back seat. Not to mention, they started detailing what they were going to do when they got home. I had a very confused boner after I dropped them off.
Confused? What's so confusing? And frankly, what's so unusual about this story? Sounds like a typical Friday night to me, know what I'm saying, folks? I've never done anything like that. I'm very boring.
Story 14. A woman in her early 20s explaining to her daughter, who must have been 4 or younger, that daddy wouldn't be coming back home because he tried to run from the cops by jumping in the river in the middle of December and froze to death. Could tell the girl was too young to really comprehend the whole thing, and the mom kept trying to explain that water was too cold and he got too tired to move and sunk in the water. The girl kept asking why he jumped in the water if it was cold, and the mom kept trying to explain and just, Story 15. Not a driver, but a passenger taking a long, late-night ride alone. Driver misses the exit to my place and ends up taking the next one. As we're passing some random hotel, he asks me if I've ever stayed there before, and then goes on to tell me about how it's the hotel that he takes his girlfriend to, and the details of what he does to her there. Earlier in the ride, he had told me he had a wife and kids. I didn't ride in an Uber for months after that.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.